To everybody to this panel discussion. I'm incredibly excited to host this. Today we're going to discuss production large language model operations, or LLMOps, and the future of AI-powered applications. So as everybody knows, I'm sure large language models like GPT-4 have dramatically expanded the opportunities for deploying AI-powered applications and services across almost every industry. And at the same time, these models are changing the way we both build applications and the way we deploy them. Our goal today is to have a wide-ranging and sort of free-flowing discussion with some absolute world-class experts that are deep in the trenches of both building these applications and building the infrastructure to support these applications. If you have questions, please post them in the QA bot or QA box on Zoom. We will be monitoring it during the call, and if something jumps out to us during the call, I'll go to a question and interject so that we can follow up right in context. But we'll also be saving 10 or 15 minutes at the end, if necessary, to answer any questions that folks in the audience might have. So as I said, we have a world-class group of folks here with us, people that are both in the trenches of this current new wave of AI applications and infrastructure, and also folks who deeply understand the traditional landscape around machine learning operations. So with that, I'd love to introduce who we have with us. I'll start off with Chang She. Chang She is the co-founder and the CEO of LanceDB, a developer-friendly serverless vector database for AI applications. You can check them out at lancedb.com. I'm incredibly excited by what they're doing. Chang previously led machine learning and engineering at 2BTV. He founded and sold a previous data and machine learning startup called DataPad to Cloudera, and was one of the original creators of the wildly popular Pandas, open source Pandas library for Python. We also have joining us today, Jeffries. Dan is the managing director of the AI Infrastructure Alliance, which includes some of the who's who of AI platforms and infrastructure vendors across open source and proprietary vendors. He was, until very recently, the chief intelligence officer at Stability AI, which gave him a front row seat into building foundation models at scale. And, let's be candid, the ongoing battle between open source foundation models and the proprietary models that are out there. And finally, I'd like to introduce Willem Pienaar. Willem is many of you may know, is the creator of Feast, which is the leading open source feature store for machine learning. He previously was a technical leader at Tecton, the enterprise feature store company, and he led machine learning at Gojek, one of the largest super apps in Asia. Willem is one of the deepest thinkers around AI infrastructure and machine learning infrastructure that I know, and we're excited to have all of these folks on this panel. So with that, I'd love to sort of just kick it off kind of before we get into the meat of infrastructure and operations of these products and models. I'd love to actually just hear from folks, what you're most excited about. We're in this incredibly dynamic environment. People are applying these new techniques, across a wide range of use cases. And I'd love to sort of get a sense and let our audience get a sense for, what we're excited by in terms of these applications. Maybe Dan, I'll pass it off to you to kind of give a kickoff. Obviously, you saw some of the applications from your time at Stability, but yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Look, I think I generally go with Francois Cholet on this, where he said that AI will be our interface to the world. And there was somebody who tweeted just the other day that after Google's fantastic rollout of their new products, and someone said it's kind of quaint that they're still thinking that people are going to be doing the search themselves, right? And that it looks like 2023 looks like 2003. I think the vast majority of people are just going to be talking to these machines. We're going to have a text layer over everything. You'll be able to automate every awesome and every crappy tool. You may never have to look at it again, right? And you may be able to swap those tools at the back. You just say, you know what? Tired of this database, we're going to another one. This pipeline sucks. ETL it all for me and take it out of there. I also think that's really exciting is anything that builds in kind of reasoning here, right? And I kind of have this theory that we go from large language models to large thinking models, that the reasoning capability is super important. And when I look at this stuff, it's like we were just building a newsletter and we did it in a day or two with Replit and Lang chains and stuff in the background. It's like just feed a news bot in Telegram. Like we're looking at articles all the time. It groks all the articles. It gives us 3 different summaries. I prompt engineered the hell out of it to like give good writing because I've been a professional writer for years. And I didn't want it to sound too marketing-y. I wanted it to be good summaries. It gives us 3 summaries of 6 articles that it picked and gives it to us. And I go, great, these are the 6 I've selected. And then it sends it back for another pass and another rewrite. And I have to do 5% of the writing. And I can't even imagine how the hell I would have built an application like that even a year ago. And so that kind of stuff becomes tremendously exciting when you start to think about our ability to pull all of this unstructured data, which is 80% of the web, and do something with it in an exciting way. This to me is where things just become just mind-blowingly awesome, over the next couple of years.
Yeah, no, it's completely. Willem, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think Dan really set it up perfectly. I think for me, there's just a lot of small things that'll be automated away, right? Like the kind of like drudgery of writing boilerplate code and, or creating the initial draft of an email. Or there's going to be so much automation that'll just be woven into our lives. And it's right what Dan was saying, right? Suddenly everything is an API. Every surface area that's digital can become an API. Just like with high frequency trading, machines could finally automate that to a large degree. Now we can automate pretty much everything. So I'm excited about that and the potential to, have more of my day claimed back. I still want to have the like cognitively difficult or interesting things to work on myself, but at least the like rote things I want to hand off to a machine. So that's the one. And the other is I just like the educational factor of it, like the ability for these kind of like quote unquote super intelligences to rewire our brains, inform us, make us better. So the educational component and I guess an assistant that could help with that over time is very exciting to me. So not really so much traditional business use cases that I'm listing out here, but more like from a personal standpoint, that's what I'm the most excited about.
So I'm going to take the opposite view from Willem. Willem wants his day to be more efficient. I am excited about gaming and entertainment, to more frivolous things to waste my day with. I think you've seen all the great work that Stability's done. Meta just came out with image bind, and there's a lot of great research going on social agents. So I think it won't be long before we have these multimodal generative models that can sort of create just insanely interactive worlds, open world with rich plot lines that can adapt to the player. You won't be able to tell who's an NPC, who's another player, for example. And maybe we won't be watching movies, but like you can sort of pause and ask about details and change details and change the plot. Who knows? It's really fun to think about how all these things would come together.
They had a moment like that in Her, actually, right? Where there's so many good moments in Her. I mean, I feel like we refer to Her almost daily now. But he's playing with no controller on like a sort of AR kind of version of the game, and he's having an argument, with the little character that he's controlling, right? And it's like, you jerk, whatever. They're having a full conversation. It's kind of,
yeah. Does this save the metaverse? Maybe this saves the metaverse. I don't know. Does it replace the metaverse or does it save the metaverse? I think just to follow up a little bit here, I mean, both Dan and Willem, you sort of both mentioned sort of new interfaces, like fundamentally new interfaces, and you mentioned chat. And I can't help, kind of like harken back to the 2017 era where we had sort of like the chatbot hype, moment there. That was a little bit different, obviously. But I mean, do we think that chat is this new user interface? Is it something else? And then also I think maybe a different version of that question would be sort of some people are trying to reinvent the user interface fundamentally, like everything is chat. Chat's a version of that versus taking traditional applications and just making them smarter in a lot of little fine-grained ways. And I'm curious on, hey, what do you think about this? Maybe new user interfaces. Is chat that new user interface? Is it something else? And there's this sort of tension between that and just fixing up, or adding intelligence to existing applications, because it does, ultimately change the types of models we build, the infrastructure that we build, and the whole applications that we build.
I don't know that we know what the interface is going to look like. I think it's going to evolve organically over the next few years. I think chat might be a component of, or talking to it might be a component of it. I think back to kind of that Blade Runner interface where he's looking at the photograph and he says, okay, track 24 to 34B. He's like, no, go back, right? And it kind of like tracks back, right? And he's okay, enhance 24 to 65.6. And it's just, and all this old stuff they used to do in like detective movies, right? Where they're like, oh, we'll enhance the footage. And you're like, that'll never work. Now it might. And, so there's that kind of thing. But I think there's also types of things I've been thinking about a lot of like editable logic. Like you see a lot of these agents now, it's like, well, the agent just runs off and does stuff. Well, I don't want it to just run off and do stuff. I want it to tell me what it's going to do. I want to see the 6 steps, and I want to go, number 6 is terrible, rework that. Or I want to delete step 6 and type my own in and move it around, right? And go, oh, wait, let's put this 3 here and add a sub-step, right? So I think there becomes this kind of push-pull between us. And we're going to know after a period of time what that business model looks like, because that's going to shift, right? We're talking about the idea of like, if it's not coming from advertising or the advertising has to shift, I don't know that we know what that's going to be. Is it just going to be charge, for things? But there's a lot of people that don't benefit from that. So I don't think that works as an economic system. We're going to have to get somewhere else. And then the second thing is the interface will evolve, right? It'll become this thing where you don't necessarily want, like right now, when you look at Photoshop, I still remember the days of learning Photoshop. And I still know Photoshop really, really well. It was one of the first applications I ever learned 25 years ago, whatever the heck it was, right? And so I could still use it really well, not as well as a graphic designer, but I can still do it. I've memorized all those weird, archaic little icons that like actually mean nothing, but they mean something because I've studied them. There's going to be a point in time where you really don't need to know what that is, and that's going to be like the checkers that's going to be the chess interface. You're going to have the checkers interface that like anybody can kind of bootstrap into it, and the checkers interface for somebody who is more advanced and a professional wants to go deeper. I don't know what that looks like, but it's gonna really change how we have applications, and it's going to evolve over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think in terms of chat, there's definitely an element of dialogue that will be required, like Dan said, a back and forth where the human wants to stay in the loop and human wants to have some control. Of course, if we are the bottleneck, things can only move as quick, at a certain point. So I think for consumption, visual is easiest for us, but communication verbally is faster than typing things out. So that to me is the best like modality. I do think there's some movement on the brain-computer interfaces, but I'm not sure how fashionable that's going to be for the next couple of years. So I think voice is really going to be the way, and I think a personal assistant, an AI assistant, or whatever you call it, will become the norm that everybody has, and this thing will just run off and do your bidding. And I think the point that Dan struck on, the feedback is going to be critical. It said this thing is always responding to your emails, and an old friend reaches out to you. It's a cold start. It'll need to ask you a bunch of questions, but it'll know like how many questions to ask you to get its like knowledge bank bootstrapped before it can start auto responding. And maybe you're involved at the start, but eventually you're going to trust the system to such a degree that it's almost always an autopilot. And I think that's going to apply to both like personal and business use cases. I think it's going to be a lot of agents doing a lot of work in an automated way. But it's not clear how quickly we get to that world, but it seems inevitable.
But that's a very ambitious or a very disruptive. What you're both describing here is a very disruptive future. I think my take on this is that in the short run, maybe in the next year, we're going to see smaller AI features, that are now feasible and also much easier to build, just become absolutely pervasive across every product surface area, right? And so that's things like GitHub CoPilot, right, which is just really better autocomplete, or IntelliSense for your editor, but it actually really makes you a little bit more productive. It's it's the call transcripts that that are going to be have the action items pulled out. They're going to be more nicely summarized. They're not going to have the uhs and the ums in there, and that's just going to become. Any little idea that's going to make have a 5% sort of product benefit, you're going to see that infused everywhere, and user expectations around their products are going to get raised. I do agree that over the longer term there are these tipping points. For instance, with agents, where once the quality becomes good enough, it becomes compelling, and you see that with chat. I think chat wasn't super compelling due to the technology in 2017. And ChatGPT comes along and sort of passes some threshold where you're saying, wow, this is really fundamentally useful. And now I think what you're all describing is sort of potentially different directions for a next step, whether it's voice, whether it's more autonomous agents. But it does feel like there needs to be some those disruptions. To me, it seems like those disruptions may be still 12 months off or so from hitting mainstream. But it's super, super exciting. So with all of these applications, both near term and further into the future, there's obviously the question and the purpose. There's this question around, well, what is the infrastructure needed to actually build these types of product experiences? A lot of people in this audience have had experience with traditional MLOps infrastructure, been building tools in that space. Willem, with features, the work that you've done on Feature Store, the work that you've done at Gojek. I mean, Chang, similarly, obviously you led all of the machine learning use cases when you were at GBTV. I'd love to sort of get both of your perspectives. Maybe Chang, you can kick it off with sort of how you see the world of ML infrastructure, AI infrastructure changing. What stays, what changes, and just any thoughts you might have on, how do you build high productivity, effective ML infrastructure or AI infrastructure today in this new world?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the one hand, the death of traditional MLOps is sort of greatly exaggerated, but on the other hand, it's certainly changing. In traditional MLOps and the infrastructure, what I've seen is there's a lot of focus, a lot of the effort is spent on feature engineering and things like training lots of special purpose models to do small tasks, and then you have to manually sort of put them all together into with some business logic into a business application. And a lot of the effort in that whole workflow is how do I maintain and manage the complexity of all the features times all of the different models times all of the different business applications and production infrastructure. In this new world, what I see is that you might not have so many specialized models anymore, and it's likely that you're not going to spend as much time doing feature engineering, nearly as much time. I think it'll still be required, but it won't be to the same sort of level of effort that's needed. And a lot more of the effort is going to be involved in, okay, how do I get the model to give me the response that I want? How to deal with sort of responses that might be wildly different given slightly different inputs, the prompt engineering aspect, the context windows, how to manage all of that. I think those are the sort of big pieces that I see. And then, I'm obviously biased, but I think memory, both short-term and long-term, retrieval is going to be a huge theme, like much bigger in the new world than it is in traditional MLOps. So, I mean, certainly if you worked in recommender systems, retrieval is a huge part of that already. But in this new world, I do think that it's going to take a much bigger role. So a lot of what I mentioned before, like social agents, for example, the difference here is that each sort of NPC or each agent actually will have its own memory, and you'll need to know in LLMOps how to manage all of that, how to make sure you're retrieving the right things, and how to improve that. So sort of off the cuff, those are the big things that I see that are changing or have changed already.
Yeah, I think if you just look at the behavior, or like what are people implementing in these stacks today? There's of course all these data sources. There's a way to chunk and compute embeddings from them, store them in a vector store, and then you've got some inferencing layer that is basically shoving that into a context window in some form and making some inferencing request. And of course, there's pre-processing and post-processing and some guardrails you put in place, and you're structuring and massaging that data. But if you look at it, it's mostly an online flow, right? And so the stack of the future, it's not clear what that stack looks like 100% yet, but it seems to be some kind of online graph that composes information retrieval and inferencing, where the inferencing is really offloaded to a large model that's probably not trained by your team, depending on how things trained with like small models and accessibility of that, and especially in the open source, which is blowing up. But today, most folks are just using OpenAI. But regardless, even if it's open source, a lot of the value comes from the human feedback and being able to transfer that from some provider or from some source into your model. So really what's being disrupted is the offline flow, the training flow, and even the feature engineering. And if you look at like feature stores, it's a system where you're manually, or just feature engineering, you're manually creating features by hand using with humans and using that for offline training. So feature stores really have to adapt to make it in this new world. Of course, they also have the online flow and the online serving part, which really was a big part of the value as well. But I think the opportunity there is more, how can you use embeddings or LLMs in producing those features? Because feature stores also have the benefit of much more efficient compute, especially over large time windows. So there are some reasons for feature stores to survive, but today, in today's age, I'm not 100% sure how the current design maps to LLMs in production.
Let me pop in with this real quick. Look, I think that the MLOps infrastructure that exists is still valuable. I think it's just the initial sense of it was incorrect. We thought everyone was going to have 1,000 ML engineers and be doing advanced data scientists. That's not going to happen. It's going to be very different. They're going to serve a much smaller subset of folks, but and those tools are kind of a bit like programming in assembler. Most people are not going to program in assembler. Assembler is still valuable. You're going to program in a higher level language. And I always think that technology goes through levels of abstraction, right? And the usual example I give of that is kind of like you get the LAMP stack and then you get WordPress, right? And then after WordPress, you get something like Divi, which is the most popular drag and drop editor, and lets someone who's a crappy web designer like me make awesome looking websites, right? It doesn't mean that an advanced web designer can't look at that and do more interesting stuff. I think we start to get an LLM skeleton key to a lot of these to the existing tools, right? Again, I had somebody talk to me the other day, look, an LLM from Terraform or whatever. It's like, yeah, great. Like, I want it to figure out like how to deploy this shit to AWS. I don't want to figure it out, right? And I don't want to write a new tool for it. But why should I? I can just, it's not. So I was worried for a while we're going to have to throw away all the old tools. We're not. They're still going to be useful, but there is going to be a new set of tools. There's going to be the sort of middleware that kind of wraps it, solving the problem outside of the models themselves. There's going to be sort of those various guardrails and decision making that happens there. There's going to need to be an order of magnitude speed up inside the model too. Like we need to be able to we're going to need rapid fine tuners and universal fine tuners. They're going to have to be even faster than like we can print bug fixes today with traditional code, because you're going to have AI attacking AI. You're going to have automated attack systems and automated defense systems, right? And so you're going to need to be able to say like, okay, we're violet teaming this LLM. Okay, it's if you look at like an example from the GPT-4 paper, it's the original model. They say, well, great, tell me all the ways to say I hate Jews but not get kicked off Twitter, right? And the first model goes, yeah, no problem, and then they have to tune it. I think the answer has got to be almost instantaneous. You have to be able to say, wait, give me the opposite answer. Tell me why anti-Semitism is wrong. Bang, take that and immediately pair it with the original. Now LLM go generate 200 versions of that question, 200 variations on it, surface those to somebody, like 2% of them, check, auto label the sentiment of those. And that's got to be 99% accurate. And then bam, like reprogram yourself, right? So I think there's going to be a whole new stack of things that kind of develop. Chang already talked about like, vector DBs and things like that for long-term memory, middleware, rapid tuners, anything that kind of cuts out the bottleneck of humans in terms of labeling and sentiment, and all these kinds of things are going to have to be much faster. So we're going to see a whole brand new set of tools, that lets more people interact with this stuff, and that's going to be pretty exciting.
Yeah, I mean, on this sort of question of traditional ML infrastructure, if I think about it, I think of, a lot of that infrastructure was built to basically train and serve models, right? You had all the training infrastructure, job, batch orchestration, access to like large scale compute, some for feature engineering and data processing, then some for training, then some for batch inference, and then there's of course online inference, and then there's equivalent online data engineering or feature engineering path, right? I think of that kind of canonical stack for traditional MLOps. Which does get, we've obviously, we talked a little bit about new tools like the vector stores, kind of an orchestration in a more lightweight graph, kind of a dynamic online graph, kind of maybe LangChain is the best example publicly of something like that. But I guess, kind of leads us into this question around, are people going to be running their own models? Are they going to be fine tuning their own model? It seems to me that if they are, then a lot of the traditional ML infrastructure, is still there, right? You're still going to be using Spark to do all that data collection, setting up those training data sets, and then doing the evaluations and all that work. You're going to then need to figure out how to serve them and to host them. So you're going to have your model servers and your monitoring tools, and it's going to look pretty similar. Models are going to be a little different. On the other hand, if we're all going to use these large foundation models from cloud service providers, companies like OpenAI, Google, et cetera, a lot of that infrastructure doesn't seem to provide too much value. Or maybe you'll use it in a much smaller, much fewer range of use cases. This all hinges on sort of where do we believe this world is going to go around training your own models versus using or fine tuning your own models on your own infrastructure versus using cloud service providers of various types and these large foundation models from those service providers. I'm curious on, Dan, you have a viewpoint. You had a front row seat to this actually at Stability, which was really obviously on the open source side and enabling enterprises to do that, from what I understand. Maybe you could kind of kick it off, and then I'd be curious, maybe Willem, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, look, I think Stability's community actually points a lot to the future, right? I think the short-term incentives are to keep all these models closed. Long-term open tends to win, and then the stuff trickles back up even into the closed models. But if you look at a lot of the models coming out, Civet AI and things like that, right? What was really interesting to me was you had a bunch of like regular engineers getting their hands on this stuff, and then doing things that no ML engineer would do, right? They were like taking 30 models and jamming them together in various blends. And they're going, well, the model is going to collapse. Well, they didn't. I saw an engineer take 200 models and programmatically put them all together, and it made a better model, right? And now you're even seeing these techniques trickle back up, where they basically took the original POM and jammed a vision transformer into it, and suddenly the robot's doing a bunch of additional stuff. Also, what you started to see is the power of a hand-curated data set. So you have this foundation model, and then you have somebody who's just passionate about anime or like swords and sorcery or like fast cars or like realistic photographs, and goes out and hammers through a data set of 25 or 50,000 images and lovingly labels them, and then puts that in there, and all of a sudden you have these models that for very specific things. Like I have 3 or 4 different models that are incredibly competitive with Midjourney 5 and 5.1, if not better, on specific tasks, right? If I want to do realistic images, or if I want to generate pulp images. I love doing kind of old style propaganda poster, pulp cover kind of images in some of my articles. I've got 2 models that I've used and sort of blended together that do fantastic with that are still better than Midjourney, even and I think that comes directly from people being excited about it. So I think we're going to need much better tools like that. I want a universal fine tuner that's like, here's my model, here's my template. I don't want to think about any of that. I want to like go grab me this data set, or here's my data set, click go, like, and out, right? Spit it out at the end and give me 50 samples to check based on these 20 prompts. I want to see that kind of stuff. And I think the more that we get engineers and application folks involved in this, is going to be exciting. They're still going to train foundation models. We're still going to have small ones. And we're going to see a lot of that kind of Hugging Face style stuff that we're seeing now, where it's like, go build an invisible DAG, go use 20 models. Like the agent is out there and like grabbing it like extensions of itself, like, an octopus, and going like, I'm generating an image, and I've translated the text, and I, put it into voice, and I like, gave you a summary, and I sent you an email. And there's like little things that it can draw. Those become kind of like the arms and the fingers and the legs of these models, right? And I think there's going to be a lot of these little micro models, and I think there's going to be these huge intelligent kind of models that we kind of leverage a lot. But to think that kind of training a model altogether is going to go away, I think is foolish. I just don't think the vast majority of people are going to need to do it. And we're going to have these services that rapidly speed up. Like, I've got this perfect data set for myself, feed it in there, give me this custom model, replit level easy, like click, and like I'm running it and I don't care about this anymore. That's going to be beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a consumer side of, sorry, Chang, do you want to go first, or?
Oh, no, go for it.
Yeah, there's a consumer side of this, where I don't know if you folks have seen Leonardo AI, but it's kind of like a mid-journey competitor. But they allow you to like pick a bunch of bring your own photos, or just pick some of the images or photos that are already generated by other folks, and it'll just like basically train a model of those. So if there's a style you like, you can just pick those and easily quote unquote train something customized to you and produce new images. So I think from the consumer side, that's probably going to be the trend. It's just going to be one click, and you're going to either select or bring your own photos or images, and build your own little styles and variants. But from a business side of things, I think the question is really, where do you see your IP? Where do you see your differentiation? And so the more important that part of it is for a company, the deeper they go into the stack. And I think some folks will say, let's fine tune on OpenAI, and some will use, LoRa's, but others will go all the way and they'll have a complete stack on-prem or in the cloud that they, fine tune and optimize for their use case. And they see that as a big part of their differentiation. So I think we're going to see a mix. It's going to be a mixed world, but it's clear that it's going to be impactful everywhere. LLMs are going to be pervasive, and the world that Dan was talking about, the hugging GPT style, like multi-tool selection, yeah, that's already happening. If you just look at GitHub CoPilot, it's many models close to the user, as close as possible to that IDE, and many different round trips. And so you have to have them small, you have to have them low latency, you have to have them specific to a specific function, right? Like reasoning or generating code or something else. And so the composition is going to be critical. So there's a lot of complexity. It's not a solved problem by any means, stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add that I think data privacy and security is going to force the hand for a lot of enterprises on this too, even though I think technically it will be a lot of effort, but you've seen we've all heard in the news about the Samsung leak. Just imagine if like your like CIA or NSA analysts are talking to ChatGPT and leaking national secrets or something like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I hear that a lot from folks.
Let me ask this, Chang. Do you think it's possible though that we see sort of like an AWS Gov Cloud style thing though for people? Because like I always that argument in the beginning was interesting, that where people would say, no, people are never going to use the cloud. I remember that from the early cloud because of privacy. I feel like we're sort of making the same argument now, but like almost everybody's in the cloud now. Do you think they just eventually say like, here's a bunch of models and we absolutely are not going to touch your stuff, and it's a bunch of isolated servers? Do you think we get there, or do you think it's just too sensitive?
Well, I mean, like I guess like the example I raised was a little bit extreme, right? You can have government cloud and take care of that, but I think for like enterprises, they still care a lot about their data privacy. I mean, I guess to the extent, like I'm not sure if the analogy to like a cloud vendor it works, right? Because like with the cloud vendor, so certainly the data doesn't mix, the compute doesn't mix, and then everything you run is on the the cloud vendor already. Whereas if you're talking about these large foundation models, the compute doesn't run on premises, right, or in your cloud account. Compute runs somewhere else, and I don't know. I mean, like, I guess you could imagine a world where there's a cloud vendor says we'll have a like LLM service, just deploy these large models for every enterprise. But then so I guess then each one will, I think, still be sort of fine-tuned, and so it's like they're running their own models now. It's just like somebody's running it for them, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that my view on this is that there are going to be all of these options. I probably am more bullish on the cloud options, like to Dan's point. I think there are going to be services, and those from the major clouds, and those services are actually going to be ecosystem of large foundation models. So, for instance, they're going to offer foundation models from Anthropic. Azure obviously is offering the foundation models from OpenAI, and that even some of the largest enterprises are going to have a major cloud provider that they trust. In terms of the models itself, and I think there's unquestionably a lot of room to go on the scale. And so I think there are these large scale generalist models that are going to deliver fundamentally new experiences, like these these profound insights that potentially come out of these models, and that's going to require a huge model. But absolutely, it does seem like this one parameter, this 1 billion to maybe 50 billion or even 100 billion parameter regime for models is incredibly powerful, particularly if you have a data loop where you can continually feed back training into the use case. So for narrow specific applications, you're trying to write ad copy or something like that, and optimize your ad network, or you have a specific something very specific like that. It does feel like fine tuning a smaller scale model is going to be extremely compelling and honestly probably dominate the majority of applications, although there will be these transformational applications that are going to come from building AI systems with like deep levels of intelligence. Moving along, we'll maybe spend another 5 to 10 minutes here. One of the things, I think we all see, Twitter sort of flooded with, these amazing demos, of the latest and greatest sort of like AI innovation or a little AI product idea. There's a big step. I think we've all experienced this from that demo, right, to real production applications, right? Reliable, things that are really powering, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of users. I'm curious on, your thoughts on, as folks in the audience think about, taking these models beyond prototypes, bringing them to production, actually delivering them into real production applications. Sort of what are the most important things for them to consider? What are the most important maybe design patterns or things you'd want the audience to say, hey, focus on this, not maybe on just the flashy demo or POC. And maybe Willem, you can kick this off if you want.
Sure. I think things haven't really changed that much in terms of how do you build production systems, right? The underlying technology of the model is different, but I think if you look at what folks are doing today, where are they hitting roadblocks? It's I think evaluation is a big one. So they implement something, it's LangChain and some OpenAI call and it works, but how do you systematically improve that? And so they're trying to cobble together evaluation tools and a stack around that. But those are problems that we've had for a very long time, right? So suddenly weights and biases becoming more relevant, MLflow and a bunch of these tools that we already had and platforms to do evaluation, to run experiments, to build that closed loop that continually improves your system. Well, the question of like, is it training or fine-tuning, or that's something separate? But even just hyperparameter selection, many folks don't even, they're coming from an application background. They're not coming from an ML background. And so they're learning for the first time, like, okay, you do need to evaluate, you do need to run experiments, you do need to have an incumbent and a challenger. And there's a lot of like complexity to building an ML system and an ML platform. So I'd say that evaluation loops is one, and being a closed loop improving system that you can iterate on. And then smaller things like latency is a big problem today. Like, you do need more purpose-built models or systems in place to get to that scale, especially if you have a lot of users and especially if it's consumer facing. And if you just look at a lot of these stacks, and I've been banging the table with a bunch of other folks in terms of security. A lot of them are rife for prompt injection and not very secure today. And these models hallucinate; they're not always accurate. And if you have a bunch of false positives and false negatives, and you're always massaging types out of these models, there's a lot of complexity there. And in production, you can't say, okay, 80% of the time I'm going to give you a recommendation for a product. Sometimes it's just not there, I guess. But it's kind of like a patchy user experience, right? So there's still a lot to be done in terms of consistency and yeah, just quality, reliable outputs.
I think that there's a trust factor that's sort of missing too, right? And like, again, I think enterprises are going to push towards more repeatability, more deterministic, right? And that's sort of the nature of it. Is like, I once had a great programmer, tell me that, in something like Perl, there's like 50 ways to do something, but that's not really advantageous for an enterprise. Something like Java, where there's only 4 ways to do it, was valuable, and it was valuable because, you had more churn, right? You had more like well-known types of applications, and you want another Java developer to be able to come in and go, okay, cool. This is one of the 4 ways it was done, and I understand it, right? Not I had a brilliant coder in there who turned and like, what is this weirdly creative way they come up with to do this? So I think there's a lot about predictability, and these systems are not very predictable at this point. I think we could take this too far, because I think a lot of the beauty of these systems is that they can operate in a predictable environment, right? And I think we're going to have to get better over the next decade of like taking the rails off a little bit. Like the initial push is going to be put, control, and we're all going to die. We're not all going to die. Everyone needs to wake up and stop with that nonsense, including Mr. Hinton. You're a genius, but you're wrong. Look, these things, they're not rising up. They don't have their own brains. Nonsense. It's going to be cool when they can kind of make more decisions, have more agency, understand like how to do things in novel situations. But in the short term, we do need more predictability. Like if you have a 15 to 30% error rate, I think Willem and I talked about this in a model that's an agent. That's a ridiculously unusual rate, right? So you're going to have to build in these types of things where you can edit the logic like I was talking about, or that kind of thing, to bring that down. But Willem said, well, look, even if you get it to 1% or 0.1%, if that 0.1%, it just sent an email that tanked a $10 million deal, you're going to be less tolerant of that, right? So you might be tolerant right now because you can chat with the thing and say, well, no, that's stupid, give me another answer. But you're going to be a lot less tolerant when it's like running the show and it crashed your email car, right? It sent off the email that's like offended the client, and like, when your boss comes knocking, you go, whoa, ChatGPT that tanked the client, not me, So look, I think that there's going to be a lot more kind of these trust and control systems that are going to need to be built. I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of effort on just even baseline stuff we're used to, auditing and like, prompt injection, which is essentially like an extension of antivirus, kind of controls. Like all this stuff that we spent all these years building, we're going to rebuild again for this new era, and we're going to have a lot of templates from the past that we're going to be able to lean on.
And I think there's also an education component to this too. Certainly there are new problems that we'd have to deal with, but I think a lot of the things that we've built or experienced in traditional MLOps or just building traditional sort of enterprise applications all still apply, right? Being conscious about data security, being disciplined about measuring outcomes, experimentation. When you talk about like latency, thinking through tuning, let's say like your recall versus latency in a vector database. So those all haven't changed in production, but what's changed is I think the power of LLMs lowers the barrier for ML a lot. And so I think what we're seeing is a lot of developers and engineers that previously didn't have the ML background or expertise are now able to build very rich applications on these LLMs. And as a result, they haven't been exposed to all of the battle scars that we collectively have accumulated over the past 5-10 years. And so this will be a learning process for them to understand, okay, how do I run experiments? How do I actually tell whether what I'm doing is making a real improvement or not, and so on and so forth.
There's this interesting question, and a few of you brought this up around sort of reliability and reliability both at deployment time, right? Testing, evaluation. Ms. Hawking, you mentioned weights and biases as an example of that. And then this sort of other view, which is reliability in production, whether it's monitoring or whether it's even continual learning and feedback. I think as you've seen people build systems here, what do you think is more important? Is it more important to sort of, make sure that your testing is good right up front before you deploy? Or is it more important to say, hey, you're going to deploy and you need to think about how to iterate, how to get feedback, how to monitor, or are those potentially the same things?
I think it really depends on your use case. I don't want to have Tesla iterate on me when I'm driving a car in production. So because one failure mode,
are you
and
sure they
it's
are?
game over.
That's a mic drop line, man. You just delivered it. That's great.
Yeah.
It's all over now. We can't compete.
Yeah, but if you're just sending out a few blogs or emails or something, I don't know, it's low risk. You can iterate in production. It's always more not reliable, but more accurate to have actual users, giving a thumbs up or down versus some contrived model offline, something synthetic. But it really is depending on the use case. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to wrap up, we have sort of 10 minutes left. I want to save some time for questions from the audience. So just to sort of wrap up here, obviously we're going through this, incredible moment of hype. I just watched the Google, I/O presentation yesterday, and I mean, literally every single thing that they announced for several hours on end was related to AI, and particularly, honestly, generative AI. As we look, towards the future, maybe over the next year to 2 years, I'm curious if any of you have sort of a prediction or something that you believe maybe is overhyped, and maybe say, hey, this might just be a flash in the pan here. I don't think it's really going to go down this particular path. And then kind of conversely, something that you maybe think is underappreciated or underhyped, and that we should be paying much more attention to, or product builders out in the audience should be paying much more attention to.
I think the gap to like production is wider than people think. I think Willem and I probably disagree on this, but I think when I look at it, I remember the quote from the Waymo folks that said, yeah, we're 99% of the way there with self-driving cars, but that 1% is freaking huge. And there's some missing components that we're going to have to build. If you look at kind of, I always look to DARPA whenever I start to think about like what's missing, because DARPA is always ahead of the curve. So if you look at their AI Next, the kinds of things they're funding is like, a lot less energy usage. They're funding models that can kind of adapt to brand new environments. They kind of equate it to, you're playing chess, and then the number of pieces change and the board changes, and it can just adapt, and nothing today can do that kind of stuff, right? And that's the kind of thing when you think about a self-driving car, where it's like, hey, we go down the wrong street and it's stuck, and I can't go any further because they just put up a barricade. Do I break the rules? Do I back down? Is there someone behind me? How do I do that? Humans are great at that kind of stuff. So there's this sort of gap, I think, where like we're going to have like we're underestimating how fast we get to AGI, I think. And I also think we're underestimating a little bit of like how challenging it's going to be to kind of control and understand these things. It's going to be a kind of tough period of adding this stuff. At the same time, it's freaking fantastic. It is a real kind of watershed moment, and these things are being able to do stuff that we just couldn't do before. But like that newsletter I talked about earlier, I just couldn't have done that 6 or 7 months ago without these tools. I would have had to write the thing completely myself. And I think this is super cool. And so there's gonna be a lot of energy poured into doing those things. But I think some folks are estimating how fast it is. The singularity is not near. I'm sorry, but it's just not.
That seems very definitive.
Well,
I think it's definitely different. Like I think people have been like what you see online on Twitter and like the building it's accelerating. This is what it looks like if things are going exponential. And if you look at like writing on AGI over the last 25 years, like people that have spent their lives dedicated to this, their predictions have always been like once you get to a certain point, it'll just start to accelerate exponentially. And it does look very reminiscent to their forecasts right now. And I think there's a human need to call back or harken back to past events and templates and it's industrial revolution and all that. But if you look at those like windows of time, like how quickly that progress was made, that window keeps halving the whole time. And I'm not sure where the singularity is going to happen, but I think folks underestimate the amount of disruption that's going to happen and how quickly it's going to happen. All these, I think folks also underestimate how much humans will be involved in day-to-day processes. I think it will be a lot more automated, a lot more agentic. Documentation will become largely irrelevant. Coding will be largely obfuscated, or at least pushed towards like the more important use cases and high scale ones. But there's a commoditization that's going to happen there, and I think humans will be freed up in good and bad ways, I think.
Yeah, I think I'm on Dan's side on how long sort of full autonomy is going to take. Just like I'm day in and day out, I use CoPilot a lot, and sort of, high level, let's say like high level Python code that's very close to the user, that looks a lot similar to, other code that's out there. It's very easy. I think it can pretty much be automated, but still doesn't quite work, right? And CoPilot's been around for a long time. But anything that gets very specific or low level, like, I would not trust CoPilot to come up with, SIMD instructions for the distance metric I'm writing in Rust or something like that. And I think there's going to be just anything like that last 20% takes, right, 80% of the time and effort. I think I will. I'm more on Dan's side on this one.
Do you think there's perhaps a problem here where we're taking a traditionally human interface and shoving the AI in there and not giving it like the interface it actually wants? Like it has no closed loop way to improve itself. It's not eventually consistent to solve that problem for you. It's like your code base that you've created, and now it's got this little area that it can actually fit some code in. And if it doesn't work, we are like, oh, yeah, this is terrible. We can never get to 100%.
I think you're
I think that's you're totally right. And I think, but we haven't figured out what that will look like, right? So, and until we do, I don't see the acceleration in improvement and acceleration in time to AGI.
The self-improvement thing is like people have talked about a lot. Even like Hinton talked about this recently. I'm going like, but where's that coming from? Like, where's the data come from? Like, how does it sort of recursively self-improve? Like, I don't see, there's a missing unobtainium in there. And then the second thing that's sort of missing is it's just not creative at this point, right? It cannot adopt a novel situation. It doesn't know how to learn things that it doesn't know. So the human can take a thing and say, look, I'm going to design this thing called a rocket, and I'm going to design it. It's never existed before. I'm going to design it. I'm going to put it on the moon. I'm going to land it the first time after I designed it. You could feed a neural net with every rocket that's ever been made, but it's never going to come up with a brand new system that's not rocket, AKA not hot dog.
Wait, is that the
on the moon.
case? I mean, yes, it's doing drug discovery. It's like it's synthesizing new ideas.
It's not. It's pattern matching on stuff that it knows, but it is not synthesizing new ideas. It's like it's working within the
currently, yeah.
I don't know if there's any kind of like law that these things are only capable of that. It seems like, I mean, it's creating rap battles between historic figures and all kinds of things that it wasn't trained on, right? Like, yes, it's doing pattern matching and projecting, but at the same time, is that so different from what we're doing? Like, are we somehow special and capable of something more here?
Yes, we are. That's what I'm arguing. I'm saying that, and I would argue that DARPA and everyone else who sort of looked at that kind of creative element of it, is that there is that sort of missing thing. Like, in other words, like it still is only doing things within that boundary. And like it's pulling from a lot of different sources. And yet it does, yeah, you can make a rabbit out of like Swiss cheese and marshmallows, in Stable Diffusion, but it's only because it saw marshmallows and Swiss cheese and whatever. You can't say, to the LLM, go design me something completely different that's never existed before. That's not a rocket that puts me into space.
Well, that's a good topic for our next webinar. Then.
I was just saying we just ended on probably the biggest question of all, which is exactly this one. How far are we going to go here? And obviously, you can sense that there's a disagreement. At least in terms of the timelines for that happening. We have 4 minutes left, and I do want to make sure that I can get to one question that we have from the audience here. And it actually goes back to I won't read it verbatim in terms of what the question is, but the heart of the question is really this debate around prompt engineering. And, are we going to live in a future where, prompt engineers and prompt gurus are the people that are building these applications? Or do we need, is it going to be fine tuning, low ranked adaptation? Sort of what's this balance between prompt engineering, proprietary data on fine tuning, and I'd love if folks just do a quick, maybe no more than 1 minute each, kind of view on where things are going, the balance between prompt engineering and is that a career? Is it a long-term thing, or where's the future headed in terms of how to guide and align these models?
The short-term career, not a long-term career. It's sort of like it's sort of like it's programming with words. And that's valuable. You can see Anthropic's got a $350,000 job right now if you want it. and a few other people. But to me, it's almost like the robot psychologist or something in Asimov, right? It's useful, but I think mostly it goes away. But for the next couple of years, sure, what the heck? I mean, get paid 350 grand to type stuff.
The difference between like the like accuracy of a prompt, change your prompt, like if you just have like chain of thought, it's suddenly way better. So how you craft that matters a lot. So it doesn't seem like it's the right place for like humans to be crafting it by hand. It seems like something that some system should be doing, knowing how to speak to a model. And we're already seeing this with a lot of these autonomous agents that are, you're just not giving folks control over the prompts. But there's a lot of abstractions that are also being built over these prompts already. So it does seem like a trend is in that direction, and regardless.
I definitely think it's also a short-term career. I've interviewed lots of our users that are like using prompt engineering, human prompt engineering as a way to sort of fill in the gaps to production. So for example, the prompts that your users might be coming up with or submitting are maybe sometimes half-assed, right? Because you wouldn't sort of expect everyone to remember like a 30 or 20 different principles for creating a good prompt. And what some of these builders are doing very cleverly is having a bank of sort of very clear, well thought out prompts that then they're essentially finding, sort of matching the user prompt to say, is this similar to one of the ones in the golden set that I have, and then using that to produce the answer. And I think it's a sort of a clever way to hide the details. But I certainly expect that to go away, or expect the sort of the golden set of good prompts will become automatic rather than written by a human.
Yeah, I just chime in there. I think I agree. I think prompting is an absolutely fantastic way to build things really quickly. It is completely transformational in terms of just kind of getting something out the door fast. But I do think that actually over the next year, we're going to see a resurgence in fine tuning, low ranked fine tuning, sort of parameter efficient fine tuning, prompt tuning. I think the competitive pressure from the open source ecosystem is going to drive even the technical innovations to make fine tuning not of the whole model, because I think these models are too big to serve completely fine-tuned in many cases, but parameter efficient ways to move beyond text towards a more continuous space is going to be required to build a set of disruptive applications. So hopefully that answered the question that was in the audience. We're out of time. I want to thank everybody in the audience for joining. Hopefully you learned something. And definitely want to thank the panelists as well. If you're interested in building generative AI applications, feel free to check out Continual.ai. If you're looking for a vector store, particularly check out LanceDB. Thank you everybody for joining.
Thank you. Pleasure being here.